Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach. There is this concept that there were 7 laws commanded to the children of Noach. And on that basis of 7 laws for the children of Noach, Judaism as a religion has this notion coming out of our stories that all people are the children of God, and that God as the parent embraces all. One doesn't have to be Jewish to have a place in the afterlife, so we're taught. One only has to observe the 7 laws of Noah. What are those laws? Where do they come from? And that's what I wanted to share and teach today. The laws explicitly are listed in the Talmud. They're not in the Bible, they're not in the Torah, though I will share what the Talmud claims or teaches are the source of how they're parsed. But first, the laws are as follows. In the tractate Sanhedrin, Nun Vav Aleph. Tenu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Sheva mitzvot nitztavu b'nei Noach. The children of Noach were commanded with 7 laws. Dinim, courts. Uvirkat Hashem, a euphemism, literally the blessing of the name, euphemism because it means cursing God. That would be blasphemy. Avodah zarah, engaging in idolatry. Gilui arayot, sexual transgression. Ushfichut damim, the pouring of blood, meaning murder. Gazal, theft. Ve'ever minachai, and the eating of the limb of a living animal. So those are the 7 laws. Where do they come from? How do the rabbis find them? And this is kind of creative. It's actually in last week's Torah reading. It's chapter 2, verse 16. That verse, which is on page 15, reads first as follows. Vaitzav Adonai Elohim, and Yud-He Vav-He, God, commanded, Al Ha'adam, over the man, Adam, Lamor, saying, Mikol Eitz Hagan, from each of the trees of the garden, Achol Tochel, you may surely eat. And that's where the 7 laws come from, in the following way. Of every tree of the garden you may surely eat. When it says the first word, vaitzav, and he commanded, these are the civil laws. And there's a proof text where elsewhere it says, for I know him that he will command his children. This verse states that God is alluding to, so that's the first, vaitzav. When it says vaitzav, commanded, civil courts. You have to have a system of justice. The next word, Yud-He Vav-He, well, that means you can't misuse the word Yud-He Vav-He. That's blasphemy. The word Elohim, that alludes to idolatry. Al Ha'adam, when it says the next word, over the man, that means don't commit murder. Al Ha'adam. And when it says Lamor, the next word, that refers to sexual transgression. And there's a proof text. If a man sends away his wife and she goes from him and becomes another man's. And then it says, Mikol Eitz Hagan, you can eat from any of the trees of the garden. That refers to theft. Can't steal. Can only eat from the trees. And then when it says, the last words, achol tochel, you shall surely eat, that is, that you may not eat from the limb of a live animal. Now, I share that proof text from 56b, from Sanhedrin, to show that that's how the rabbis, one, do interpretation. So we Jews don't read the Bible literally. Laws don't come out of literal commands. Sometimes proof text can feel like a bit of a stretch. The case is something on one hand that is remarkable in religious worldview, and that is emerging from last week and this week's Torah reading. Now again, I'm repeating. And that is that God is the creator of all, and as the creator of all are God's children, to be embraced by God, and that God is a moral God, and that there are these, in this case, 7 laws that if people do, they continue to be close to God. That's the positive. But I'm teaching today, not so much preaching. As to say it's not that simple, of course. First of all, in the Talmud, there's about equivalent of 8 pages that deal with these discussions, mostly about what is considered sexual transgression. That gets about half those pages. And there are other discussions that ultimately add up to about 30 suggested possible laws. And that's more to be bracketed because the 7 that I just listed, which everybody agreed on, Tenu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, become this key concept. Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, the 7 laws of Noach. Now, the most influential codifier of Jewish law is Maimonides. And Maimonides has a unit, it's in the book of Judges that deal with Sanhedrin, the laws of courts. One chapter deals specifically with the laws of non-Jewish kings and the requirements of being a secular kingdom, which are in some ways different than Jewish law. Here's one example. A Jewish court basically does not engage in capital punishment because the proof is so high, as the rabbis will work it out. Not so for a king or a secular court. They can do capital punishment. In fact, here's one of the problems of the 7 laws of Noach when read closely. All 7 laws have the same penalty, and the penalty is beheading, which was considered, by the way, the least painful form of capital punishment, in contrast to things like stoning or burning. It was considered the least painful way, but all those 7 laws that I just gave have the same punishment, according to Maimonides: beheading. And if you read Maimonides, we're in chapter 9 of the Laws of Kings in Sefer Shoftim, he describes, as he understands from the Talmud, what the bottom line is. These laws are even stricter than the laws for Jews. Right? Jews are used to saying, we have 613 commandments, non-Jews only have 7. Okay? True. But for a Jew to violate the laws of cursing God, for it to be a capital punishment, it can only be the Yud He Vav He, the Tetragrammaton. But for a non-Jew, all the other 7 important laws of the Bible, those 2, if used to blasphemy, to curse God, for a Jew, only the 1. For non-Jews, the sub-names, that's beheading also. But even more, stealing. For stealing, you have to have a minimum amount. It has to be worth at least a pruta, which is the smallest amount of currency. to be quantifiable as theft. Not so for the 7 laws of Noah. Any stealing, even less than a pruta, is a crime, and the punishment is beheading. Likewise, for eating, right? You can't eat the limb of a live animal. And for a Jew to do so is a major violation of cruelty to animals. But you have to eat at least the amount of a large olive to be quantifiable, zayit, as food. Not so for the 7 laws of Noah. No quantifiable amount. The smallest amount constitutes a violation. So it's also remarkable, and for Maimonides, there is no ignorance of the law as a defense, and blasphemy and idolatry is considered a capital offense for a non-Jew. Now the good news is that for Maimonides, Muslims were considered to be in full conformity with the laws against idolatry, because for him, the Muslims by definition were monotheists, believing in one God. And idolatry is understood in the Talmud, and for Maimonides, as praying to a holy tree, an Asherah, or to an idol. For Maimonides, he wasn't so sure about Christians and Trinity. He lived only among Muslims. It would take another Jew named the Meiri after Maimonides, who lived among Christians in the Rhineland, to say, the Trinity is really 3 in 1. They too are not idolaters. But people who were idolaters, and there is still idolatry, as defined by the Talmud, those who worship idols, objects as having powers, that would be a capital offense. And so this is a teaching for reality testing, to say that concept. There's a wonderful book by Joseph Telushkin on the Lubavitcher Rebbe, people who had yichud with the Rebbe. Yichud meant those private interviews to gain counsel. And what's wonderful about the book is it's kind of a harvest of what the Rebbe said as a sage in private to all these supplicants. And there's a lot of wisdom. One of the remarkable things about the Rebbe is he said to his shluchim, we do not do conversions. And Chabad rabbis will not do conversions. I could speculate in a well-grounded way, including private conversations with Rabbi Joseph Telushkin, as to why the Rebbe didn't approve of his people doing conversions. But I bracket that to say that for the Rebbe, in meeting non-Jews, and there's a wonderful story about Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, who was appointed to be, when she gained a seat in Congress, to be head of the Agricultural Committee. And she felt that she was really getting sidelined. And she was representing in the Brooklyn area constituency, asked to meet with her, and he said, you know, you have a lot of power because there's a lot of food that flows through the Department of Agriculture. You can use your influence to allow for that food to be redistributed. And she, when she retired, paid tribute to the Rebbe for giving her guidance on how to make her power real and effective. But he, for one, as an example, said of non-Jews, you don't need to convert, you just need to observe the 7 laws of Noah. And that sounds, on one hand, positive. Now to return to the positive. Back to Maimonides. If a non-Jew was a Muslim, by definition, they were fulfilling those 7 laws. and with that had a place in the world to come. And by extension, for the Rebbe, it meant that for a Christian too, following the Meiri, just by being a Christian, you had a place in the world to come. And so I claim that, and yet say up close to know that Jews weren't always so sweet in how they understood those 7 laws of Noah. And that's important to know, not to oversimplify and oversweeten. And I would add, for me as a teacher and a rabbi, I began an introduction to Judaism class last week with 16 students in the class, a larger class than in most years, in part because the Reform community in Orange County does not have a conversion class this year, which saddens me greatly, because under Rabbi Einstein's leadership for almost 30 years, if not longer, we in Orange County, through all the Reform congregations, actively had a master teacher, the author of the text they used, enabling Jews to become adopted into the Jewish people. I, for one, am not only content with the 7 laws of Noah. I welcome those who wish to become adopted members of the Jewish people as full members of the Jewish people. I honor that the spiritual wisdom of Judaism and the richness of our tradition, its rites, its ways, its learning, can, for those who so choose, add richness to their lives. I do not see necessarily the 7 laws of Noah as the equivalent of the 613 laws for those who wish to be adopted as a member of the Jewish people. I use the language of adoption. I use it from Rabbi Abraham Infeld. Actually, he's not a rabbi. He chose not to be a rabbi, but Abraham Infeld is an important teacher for me and for so many. Abraham Infeld, who was born in South Africa, is a graduate of Hebrew University in Jerusalem in history, and went on to become the head of Hillel International for 10 years, and from that would go on to write the business plan for Birthright and become the first director of Birthright. And in that role of working with young people throughout his career, Abraham Infeld said, the right word in Hebrew for a Jew by choice is ger. Ger is not a convert. Ger is translated as a resident. A convert implies that somebody is changed. In chemistry, it's a new kind of compound. It's not a conversion, it's an adoption. Because when you adopt somebody into your family, you love them just like your biologic children. You do not make the distinction between how they came into your family. They are all equally beloved. And so there are in our midst those who are beloved as adopted members of our community, who have chosen not to see and identify with the 7 laws of Noah as their spiritual quest, but with the fuller array of Jewish life and living. And so I bring it back to where I started. We do have a revolutionary concept, as the rabbis of the Talmud that I read today in Sanhedrin understand, which is that all people as the children of God are embraced by God as fully God's children for the observance of basic ethical commandments, including the need for courts and justice, the command not to harm animals unnecessarily, basic laws around property and marriage and life. And yet, for us, the opportunity as Jews, whether born as Jews or adopted into the extended family, to live a full and vibrant spiritual life transcends the opportunities of Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 laws of Noach. Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, May we embrace your ways. Amen.